Okay, this is part 2 of 5B, and we're looking at different studies and determining whether or not we should believe them. So we looked at a couple of studies up here, and these are just hypotheticals. Now we're going to look at what we call little stat bites. So much like when you hear sound bites of news stories, you hear a little bit. Statistical studies are often reduced to 1 or 2 sentences and can refer to them as stat bites. And so for the following stat bites taken from various news sources, we want to discuss what crucial information is missing and what more you would want to know before acting on that study. So the first one, it says USA Today reports that more than 60% of adults avoid visits to the dentist because of fear. Okay, so there's a couple of things when you look at this. First is 60% of adults. How did they select those adults? So that would be one question that you would want to ask. So how did they select the adults? Is there participation bias? What could be misleading there with how they selected the adults? And then, the next one is they avoid visits to the dentist because of fear. What is the definition of fear? That's another thing that you might want to know before acting on the study. How do they define fear? Because fear for one person could be very different for another, especially when it comes to the dentist. Some could fear the shots. Some could fear the exposure to radiation from x-rays. There could be several different things. I know when I was a kid, my fear of the dentist was that really yucky fluoride that they would put in my mouth and I'd have to chew on. So fear has a very broad term that would need to be defined in order to proceed on that study. And those are a couple of things there. So in this next one, according to USA Today, 26% of Americans rate the potato as their favorite vegetable, making it the most popular vegetable. Again, in this one they say 26% of Americans. So same kind of question to begin with. How were the respondents, so the people who responded, selected? What kind of measurement was used? Because it says 26% of Americans, and that's a pretty broad statement there. You'd want to do a little bit more research into that. The other thing is, when we're talking about potatoes as the favorite vegetable, did they kind of, I guess the best way I could say is, did they stack the deck? Or, another way of saying it was potato prompted as a choice? So like, was it multiple choice and potato was on there? Or did it say, would you consider potato to be your favorite vegetable? Is there some way they tried to prompt people to select or not select potato? So was it prompted as a choice, or, fill in the blank? How did they structure their question? Would be something we'd want to look into, before we proceeded with those findings of a study. Because you don't want to go out and say, well, okay, quarter of the population rate potatoes their favorite vegetable, so we're just going to start growing potatoes like crazy. If those 26% of people, are people who are sitting at a restaurant eating potatoes, that could definitely have some bias in it. So you'll want to know how are those people selected. Okay. Here's another one: are the headlines accurate? So headlines are condensed versions of an article or a study trying to get the attention. And so we've got headlines that are followed by a brief summary, and we want to discuss whether or not the headline accurately represents the study that's presented here. So this first headline, the only one we're going to look at in this video. So, drugs shown in 98% of movies. Okay, so that's the headline. Now in the summary, it says a government study claims that drug use, drinking, smoking was depicted in 98% of the top movie rentals. Okay, hopefully as you compare the headline and the summary, you see some discrepancies. The first one is with that first word. Okay, drugs is not the same thing as drugs, drinking, and smoking. So they make a generalization of drugs, which and it says drug use. So in the headline it says drugs, but in the summary it says drugs, drinking, alcohol, and smoking. So there are definitely some inaccuracies there in drugs. And then in the statement it says 98%, or the headline it says 98% of movies. And that is definitely not the same as 98% of the top movie rentals. So definitely some inaccuracies there right off the bat when you look at that headline and compare it to the actual summary that you see for the story.